woman, let's call her Eva, gets to a crosswalk near her home and notices something small. The curb ramp is broken. If you are walking, you barely notice it. If you are pushing a stroller, you struggle a bit. If you're in a wheelchair, you stop. So Eva does the responsible thing. She reports it. She finds the city website, uploads a photo, describes the location, and hits submit. And then? Nothing. No confirmation, no timeline, no sign that anyone ever saw her message. And in that silence, she realizes something. Something incredibly common and incredibly damaging. They don't hear me. That's how trust erodes. Not in a huge scandal, but in these quiet moments when the system never speaks back. So, what changes when institutions finally learn to listen? Not once in a while, not just at election time, but continuously? For most of human history, institutions were built to broadcast. They announce decisions, they publish policies, they set the rules. And citizens are expected to adapt. Now, even when institutions do occasionally listen, they do so on their own terms. An election every few years, or a slow survey. But this creates a massive wall, as if we were speaking two different languages. We speak in the language of life, confusion, frustration, urgency, and the institution responds in the language of bureaucracy, forms, categories, waiting. So over time, people learn a rational behavior. They stop speaking, not because they don't care, but because speaking simply doesn't work. And when the conversation stops, the connection breaks, and that's exactly where we lose trust. And trust is not a marketing problem. It's not solved by shinier websites or better slogans. Trust is a relationship, and relationships are built through listening. This matters right now, not as a philosophy, but as a reality. Globally, trust is in the basement. Barely 4 in 10 people trust their government. In Czechia, it's 2 in 10. 19%. That's not just a number, that's a warning light. So what would a government have to do consistently to become trustworthy? Over the years, smart cities were sold as this urban sci-fi: sensors on lampposts, dashboards in control rooms, predictive traffic lights. But what if the smartest thing a city can actually do is not measure itself better, but understand its people better? Because citizens already tell their government what's wrong every single day. They write emails, they call helplines, they post on social media. So the problem is not that we are entirely silent. The problem is that we speak in human stories and the system only understands checkboxes and forms. And when you try to squeeze a human story into a tiny box, the meaning gets lost. By the time it reaches the top, the leaders don't see a human. They just see a data point. A smart city is a city that can hold a conversation at scale and close the loop. It's not just data in, but taking action, following through, and explaining why. But here's the thing. Listening continuously, at scale and in human language, is something governments have never been structurally able to do before. Not because they didn't want to, but because the tools simply didn't exist. Millions of messages, thousands of categories, human stories arriving faster than any bureaucracy can process. Continuous listening simply didn't scale. Now, we arrive at AI. Not as a revolution, not as a replacement for government, but as the next tool. Governments have always adopted new tools when society demanded it. Paper files, databases, the internet. And AI belongs in that lineage. But AI is not the hero of the story. It's simply an enabling layer that sits between institutions and citizens turning everyday language into action at scale. When used well, it understands what people write. It routes messages to the right place, it detects urgency, it summarizes what matters, and it can reveal patterns leaders would never be able to see by processing one ticket at a time. But AI doesn't solve judgment. It doesn't decide what is fair. It cannot be morally accountable. AI can give institutions ears, but it cannot give them a conscience. Still, we shouldn't be asking if AI belongs in government. That's already been answered. The real question is whether governments will use AI deliberately to take action, to explain, to be accountable, or accidentally, without public understanding or control. When citizens speak, 5 things need to happen. It starts with acknowledgement. That's the simple, immediate proof that you are not shouting into a void. Then comes understanding. That's the grasping of the context and the urgency of what you are actually saying. Next is the action. That's the pivot point. Not always a yes, but a real decision. Then we close the loop. This is the updates, the timelines, the explanation of what happened. And finally, the system learns. It spots the patterns so the next person doesn't have to face the same issue. That is the trust loop. And here's the trick. AI can make steps 1, 2, 4, and 5 reliable at scale. As humans, we must own step 3. We own the judgment, we own the accountability. So AI doesn't exactly create trust, but it can make the behaviors that rebuild trust operational. Now, I realize there's a tension at the heart of this. Listening builds trust, but surveillance destroys it. So where is the line? The difference is simple. Surveillance is something done to people, monitoring them without their consent for purposes they can't see. Listening is something done with people. It's when you choose to speak and you understand what happens next. And that difference matters, because if governments want to claim they're listening, they need more than just a new tool. They need a new social contract ordinary citizens can actually understand. This new social contract of listening has limits, because listening should never become a backdoor to data collection. If you're reporting a broken curb, the city needs a location and a photo, not your identity, not your history, not your background. A system we can trust asks a simple question. What is the absolute minimum we need to fix this issue? And listening also has to go both ways. In any relationship, if one person speaks and the other just nods and walks away, that's not a conversation, that's extraction. A good system closes the loop by default. I heard you, here's what's gonna happen, here's when. And finally, listening has to be something we can verify. It means being crystal clear about where AI is being used, treating its risks like we treat safety engineering, constantly testing for bias and reliability. That is the only way you rebuild trust, by doing the work consistently, especially when it's inconvenient. Now let's go back to Eva. Imagine 2 versions of her experience. Version 1. Eva reports a broken curb, she gets a ticket number that means nothing to her, and she hears nothing. The city might even fix the issue eventually, but from Eva's perspective, the relationship was already broken. Trust didn't die because of the outcome, but it died because of the silence. Now version 2. Eva writes in her own words, "The curb ramp at this crosswalk is broken, my neighbor in a wheelchair can't get through." Within seconds, she gets a confirmation and a public status link. Now, notice what I'm not claiming. I'm not claiming the city magically has an infinite budget. I'm not claiming every issue gets fixed overnight. I'm claiming something much simpler and more powerful. People can tolerate reality if reality is explained. So then the city responds to Eva, scheduled for repair on Tuesday, or this needs coordination with another department. Here is why it's going to take longer. This is not a futuristic AI government. This is basic civic dignity delivered at scale. Many governments today operate like a body with poor nerves. Pain exists in neighborhoods and services and daily life, but the signal travels slowly. It gets diluted, misrouted, or ignored. And by the time leaders hear about it, the problem has become a crisis. So then the same cycle repeats. Panic, blame, temporary fixes, and then silence again. AI can enable what I would call a civic nervous system, not to control citizens, but to detect friction early and to respond predictably. And when the system responds predictably, something changes. People report issues because reporting actually works. They comply because explanations exist. And they cooperate because they feel respected. And that matters because the alternative is not neutral. When people feel unheard, they don't only disengage from services, but they also disengage from society. If governments want to rebuild trust, they should stop asking, how do we communicate better? And start asking, how do we listen better and prove it? AI gives us the chance to redesign the relationship between institutions and citizens around dialogue. But whether that technology becomes a tool for trust or a weapon for surveillance depends on the choices we make right now. For most of human history, institutions spoke and people had to adapt. Now, we have the tools to do something different. We can build societies where we don't just live under systems, but are in conversation with them. Because trust, real trust, returns the moment people finally feel heard. Thank you.